last to the four of us. Tomorrow there'll be more of us. Telling the story of
morning, guys.
We'll tell the story of ways that last to freedom. Something they can never take away. No matter what we tell. Let's have another round tonight. Last to the four of us. Tomorrow there'll be more of us. Telling the story of tonight. Let's have another round tonight. Let's tell the story of tonight.
This will help you today.
We'll tell the story of tonight. Last to freedom. They'll tell the story of tonight. Tell the story of tonight. There's nothing rich folks love more than going downtown and slumming and
All right, good morning, guys. It's good to see you. Let me see here. Karen, can you come look at something for me? My wife and I are both trying to e-learn, and so we're kind of each other's like IT staff right now. So I'm just gonna have her take a look at what I've got going on right now. Were you able to create more grids?
As more people check in, there'll be more grids. So at the top, that little grid, go to the right. You have only the ones with speakers and
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
highlight speakers is kind of nice, but you can get, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks a lot. All right. Good morning, guys. It's nice to be back with you virtually. I wish I was back with you guys personally. If you guys are anything like my kids, well, first of all, if you're anything like me, the schedule's starting to get kind of weird. It kind of feels like the summer. So sadly for my wife and I, we'll get in the middle of the summer and try to figure out what day it is because one kind of blurs into the other. But this morning I barely woke up on time. So I'm wearing the Armstrong Spirit gear because of the fact that I woke up late. So if you're having any of those sorts of things taking place, that's understandable, but it's not the most fun feeling. If you are having the same feelings as my 15-year-old, is now got what would seem to be the dream of time off, and she's just missing her friends. And so if that's where you guys are, I'm feeling the same. So not being near you guys and being able to interact with you is absolutely not where I'd want to be. Where we're sitting right now, as far as the news last night and over yesterday, we've been told by the federal government to prepare for the next 2 weeks for carnage. And that's, I mean, they're using some pretty graphic bad language. This is going to be our Pearl Harbor with the number of casualties that they're anticipating. But then we're fluctuating between messaging. And so last night, the governor gave the State of the State address, and I was expecting him to be more specific. But what was weird is in the morning, we had our federal government talking about Pearl Harbor. And then last night during his press conference, President Trump was talking about seeing a light at the end of the tunnel and things are about to get good. So we've got kind of these mixed messages that are flying around currently. Many of the states are complaining that they can't get the supplies they need, but President Trump says that they have the supplies that they need. So we've got a disagreement going on with that. And then finally, in the news right now, there is an anti-malaria drug where a couple of years ago, we passed something called the Right to Try Act, which means that if you're terminally ill, they created a law that said that you can test out drugs that haven't been vetted by the FDA to find out if they might like miraculously give you a chance to survive. President Trump is pinning a lot of hopes on an anti-malarial drug to fix COVID-19 without any sort of clinical trials to actually prove that it'll do anything. But we're buying millions of dollars of this drug to farm out to people. And the fear that's happening now is maybe we're advertising a solution that might not be a solution, because as you guys have learned about in your health classes, biology classes, and whatever, you do like trials and tests and experiments with controls to find out what works. And we're kind of racing past that. So I'm hoping that our president has it right, because the consequences of being wrong in this situation is pretty dark. What we do know, though, is if the president's talking about the next 2 weeks being our Pearl Harbor, that puts us into late April, which means we're waiting to see how accurate the predictions are. We do know that we were told that we would have between 100 and 240,000 people pass away if we did everything right. But we still have beaches open in Georgia, and we still have people fighting for their First Amendment right to meet in churches. And so we've got some interesting things, including the fact that every state to the west and south of us has refused to do what we're doing. So Iowa and the Dakotas are kind of living things as normal. And so I'm hoping that that doesn't mean that we have to shelter in place longer, but that's kind of the state of the situation we have right now. So I wish I had more sunny, concrete things. Last night, the governor's State of the State address was pretty fluffy of just we're Minnesotans and we're going to get through this. We all anticipated he might be more specific about how long you and I are going to be out of school. And he refused to go there because the statistics are saying one thing, but the president is saying something much rosier. And so we're hoping that the president is right. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look then at what was going on with the announcement that took place last week on Thursday with the DBQ. And so I'm going to start there by taking a look at the assessment that you guys have. And in particular, the thing that they advertised was that they were going to hold a press conference on Thursday, which I was able to talk to you about on Friday. But then they also advertised that there would be more detailed information that came out midday Friday. And I created a tutorial video for you guys to help out with that. But today is the day that we actually start playing with that. And so what they did is they actually pinned down for us that while they said period 1 through 7 is fair game for the AP test, they're only going to be asking you an essay question from periods 3 through 7. So the stuff that we did over the past week, periods 1 and 2, isn't something that's lost for you, because that all that preparation that we were doing gets you ready for contextualization. And so that's what we'll be highlighting today as we work our way forward. We will also still continue with current content, because that is also fair game for contextualization. If I had to make a guess, though, as far as the essay questions, I've already laid out for you different essay questions that are pretty easy to anticipate that would hurt the kids' chances to get great scores by gaming it on the internet. Things like the path to the revolution, compare and contrast Articles of Confederation and Constitution, path to the Civil War. Those are all things that you've studied previously that can cause problems. Progressives and the New Deal, compare and contrast, is easily one. So what I'll be doing with you guys over the next month, this is all stuff that we've covered before. You've got the notes for it. We'll be doing reviews and writing activities. And today is going to be just a baseline test to find out how you're doing. And I'm going to lay out for you what the new rubric is, so you can try out a write today in a formative sort of fashion. I'm not going to add any sort of new content. The next content that we move on to is the Vietnam War. And we'll be doing some study with Vietnam this week. And especially Vietnam has been compared backwards to things like our Manifest Destiny, imperialism, Spanish-American War. So Vietnam is a really easy one to contextualize as a war that we lost for containment compared to wars that we won during the periods that are testable. But what we'll be doing is we'll be taking a look at period 3, the concept outline that you guys have, 1754 to 1800. So you'll want to have your concept outline packet available for you if you don't have it available yet. Let me show you then what they've provided for us. After I remind you of these things. First of all, I will have the recording for you available. Oops, sorry. All right, that's better. Make sure you take your attendance so that I'm able to record that for you. Make sure you get that done by 2 p.m. today. I've got all the links here available for the stuff that we're doing, except for the essay itself. You'll be doing this essay on AP Classroom today. So I'm going to have a DBQ that you'll be writing tonight to get it done by tomorrow, so that then I can ask you when you come to the class section tomorrow at 8, what problems you might be having. So I'll go over all of these instructions at the end of our session today. Let me highlight, first of all, your AP coronavirus updates. This is the page that tells you that you're testing on Friday, May 15th. You're going to be testing at 1 p.m. so that every kid in the United States is testing at the same time. Down at the bottom of the page, you will find your history and social sciences. And this is where they break down the details of the test. And so if you find yourself struggling to remember the stuff that I described for you today, you can take a look here. You're going to have a 45-minute window to read and respond to the AP test question. This is less time than they normally give you for a DBQ, but this is also 2 documents less. And so they're feeling that they can shave time and still be safe. They're trying to put you on a time limit. If you've ever played a sport with a clock, you understand that with a clock, that then puts pressure on you to perform in the moment. And if you end up wasting time doing other things like searching on the internet, emailing your friends or whatever, then that's time lost that could be spent scoring a goal, hitting a basket or whatever. You're going to be doing 1 question, and it's going to be weighted as 100% of your grade, but they don't know what the benchmarks are going to be as far as success. They do lay out for you what's going to be going on with the rubric itself. And what I would encourage you to do today is I would encourage you to take the rubric that you see right here and print it. And so I would print this DBQ document off. You can see it right here. That way you'll be able to look at it while you're doing your writing today and with upcoming essays. This is the only essay we'll be working with, so this is the only rubric that you will need. You will not need the rubrics that I printed off for you in class, but the comments that I made on them are still going to be valid, except for the idea that all you need is a 4 to pass the AP test, because now your curve score is made out of 10 rather than the old score scale of 7. What you'll want to notice then is it says students may choose to, but do not need to provide content knowledge from units 1 and 2 for context. It also says that 8 and 9 will not be on the test, but you can also use that for context if you would like to. But when you take a look at the DBQ rubric here, the thing that I'd like to highlight for you is this. After having a weekend to sleep on it, I've been watching a lot of AP teachers around the country, and there are a lot of teachers. This is kind of their pet thing. This is their NFL Monday morning quarterbacking. When I played fantasy football, I'll take the Monday, Tuesday to complain about all the things that these athletes who are much better than I am did or did not do. That's kind of what they're doing here. Is there's really no good solution for what to do with your assessment because of the fact that you're living in really weird times. And you have my sympathy for what you're going through right now. If it doesn't seem like a hardship to be away from school currently, it is totally abnormal what you are experiencing. And I wouldn't wish this on anybody, given the fact that it might be fun to have a day or 2 off, but this is scary, especially when you start factoring in the idea that there are people in the area who are being affected by coronavirus. If you have medical professionals in your lives, be thinking of them and sending out good thoughts to them, because of the fact that for many of them, they've had to have the conversation with their families about what happens when they get sick, because they are worried about that. We do have friends of ours who have gotten sick with coronavirus, and it feels awful. And for some, it means that they're not going to survive this. And so the idea that you've got that hanging over your head, hopefully you don't dwell on that all the time, but also hopefully you're not being risky. For us then, when I take a look at the DBQ, I don't have complaints about the rubric, because if you've been working on the skills we've been working on, this will allow you to earn more points based on what many of you guys are doing as emerging writers. The thesis points stayed the same, and I'm recording this right now. So if you find that you need to go back to this for more explanation, to write down on your rubric or whatever, there's nothing different about the thesis statement. All you have to do is make a claim in the first or the last part of the essay, preferably the first or the last paragraph. We'll be talking more about that. You don't need to use an X, A, B, Y thesis statement if you are still struggling with that. But your complexity point stayed the same as well. So your unicorn point that kids get for doing any of these things is still out there. And in particular, the unicorn point comes from the idea that with your thesis statement, you're being asked to do what are the differences. If you're also able to do an XABY where you talk about similarities and differences, or continuity and change over time, or being able to talk about why there are multiple causes and how some of them are more important than other ones, you're going to look good. If you're able to explain relevant and insightful connections within and across periods, this could be your second contextualization. And so the big highlight that we had for this is point is still there. as kind of the icing on the cake sort of point. And we're going to be working over the next month to help you to become sophisticated enough to be able to handle that point. As you take a look at your contextualization point, that stays the same too. And as you go into this area, then the blue shaded areas are the only things that have changed. And so it says here that and on the old rubric, if you used a couple, let me see here, it was a few documents that you had to use in order to be safe. This is just one and then two documents to keep yourself safe, just using them as summaries. And then this right here is getting into actually using an analytical approach to your documents where you're not just summarizing them, but you're linking them back to your thesis statement. Down here, you used to only have to do one additional piece of evidence in your essay that wasn't included in the documents. If you do a second one, that can earn you a second point. That's also why we're going to try out contextualization a few times, because those contextualizations might serve this purpose once you've satisfied this spot on your rubric. So I scan down here. They're looking to see you use HIPPO for your documents. And now it's saying that for HIPPO, you only need to do that once with your documents to earn 1 point, and a second time for a second point. On the old rubric, you were asked to do that 3 times. I'm going to train you to do it for all 5 documents. And so that means that by going extra, we should be good. Your thesis, your essay that you're going to be writing then is an AP Classroom. You're going to find that it is labeled as your period 3 DBQ. You should be able to see that when you're working today. This is what I'm going to want you to have done when you guys come tomorrow. So I'm going to want you to type this essay and submit it on AP Classroom. And I'll be teaching you how to specifically do that. But what I want you to do is I would like you to please write down this question on a sheet of notebook paper. So your question is, evaluate the extent of change in ideas about American independence from 1763 to 1783. When you write down this essay question, what I would like you to do then is I would like you to deconstruct it. And the way that you deconstruct it is by circling and underlining what things are you supposed to write about and what things are you supposed to do. And so the things that you're writing about is you're writing about the ideas about American independence from 1763 to 1783. That's from the end of the French and Indian War to the end of the American Revolution. I want to highlight for you that this rubric up here gives you some ideas that are essential. So it lists out for you the stuff that they would like you to do. Ignore synthesis and keep in mind that this is from an AP test from a few years ago. It says here that your skill is evaluate the extent of change. And so this is your CCOT. And if you wanted to show complexity, you are going to be writing a thesis statement, an XABY, that will evaluate, was there a lot of change? Was there a little change? Was there no change? In some ways they changed, and in some ways they did not. In some ways, some people changed and some did not. And so that's the way that you'll be earning your complexity point, is potentially by exploring that idea. Like, I'd like you to keep in mind when you do this DBQ, and you can put this onto your sheet of notebook paper. John Adams famously said, when he was asked to break down how many patriots were out there during the American Revolution, he said that it was a third, a third, a third. There was a third of the people who were patriots, a third of the people who were loyalists, and a third of the people who were just neutral farmers who were happy with whatever they got because they were not super invested in what was taking place. As you're working today, then, what I'm going to want you to do is I'm going to want you to choose 5 documents for you to write about when you're working tonight. And what I want you to be working with those 5 documents, let me see if that's what I put into my instructions. Let me see here. There we go. So you're going to be using 5 documents. The only thing that they want us to make sure that you're practicing is I'm going to want you to make sure that one of your documents is document 1. They have said that they're going to put onto the AP test one non-text, non-print version of a piece of evidence that they want you to analyze. And I'm going to want you to include this as one of your 5 documents that you're working with. And I wanted to see tomorrow when we get back together at 8 a.m., I want to see if you were able to analyze it the way that I did. We are at that stage of the course that we were going to be in anyways, where we were going to be formative in nature with the idea that you're not supposed to be good with this. The DBQ is the hardest element of the AP test. The average score is a 2. We should be able to score better than that with practice. But what I'd also like you to be thinking about is, as we're reviewing your period 3 concept outline, keep this sheet of paper near you. And what I want to highlight for you is you're going to see spots in your concept outline where you can recognize, oh my goodness, this is totally where the essay question is coming from. And that's intentional. If you understand your concept outline, any essay they ask you should be good. You're going to find inside your concept outline actual elements that will help you to write this essay question, where they're going to give you the answers. They're just going to leave off the proper nouns that you will want to be able to insert. And so I want to be reviewing that with you today to keep you safe as well. So when you're taking a look through tonight, look through these documents, figure out which of them you want to use. But in particular, what I also want you to be developing an eye for, I want you to look for which of the documents throws you off. There's going to be a number of documents in here that are easy, that are middle, that are hard. And if you find that you use all the easy and middle documents, I want you to find all of those. Your dilemma, though, is if you're finding enough hard ones, you're going to figure out then that that's the way the rubric is meant to trip you up. Like, let's say on our DBQ that we do in May, let's say they give you 2 that are really ridiculously hard. You're going to have to get one of those 2 right to get a good score on the DBQ. That's impressive. And they're going to build the DBQ in that way to have stuff that's tricky, because they don't want to be giving away college credit in ways that are way too easy or to way too many people who maybe don't deserve it. So they want you to be able to flash that historical thinking skill to be able to be good. So I'll be checking out the chat to see if any questions pop up. I am going to want you then to take a look at your concept outline, and we're going to be running your concept outline today with the idea of making sense out of it in the context of the DBQ that you'll be writing this evening. So when we take a look at this first page that you have, you'll notice that they start off each of these period concept outlines with a contextualization page. And it says, explain the context in which America gained independence and developed a sense of national identity. These things right here could be your contextualization, the big trends or movements that are leading us into the time period that you are studying. So if your question is asking about the rise of the ideas, and I'll flash back here, of American independence, it mentions that Britain attempted to assert tighter control over its North American colonies, and the colonial resolve to pursue self-government led to a colonial independence movement. And they contextualized by pointing out that we had battles going on between the British and the French, with Native Americans being used as allies for both sides. And then at this moment in time, the French have been defeated by the British, and the Native Americans have lost a major ally. This military competition then could be used as the contextualization to explain what's going on with the battle between the British and French. Sophia, will you be updating the grade book with where I'm missing our old work? Yep, just got a bunch of bigger fish to fry right now, where I'm trying to transition from being an in-classroom teacher to an e-learning teacher. And that's taking up loads of time right now, but I do plan on getting your grades up to snuff. I'm still also waiting insights from the school district and from the state to try to figure out how long you're going to be out, and then also what we should be doing as an assessment model. But long story short, you will be seeing gradebook updates coming up soon. That's a really good question. Notice also this one, the desire of many colonists to assert ideas of self-government, and in the face of renewed British imperial efforts led to a colonial independence movement and war with Britain. That was the idea that the colonists liked salutary neglect. They'd already established representative government. The British then put into place taxation, which the colonists hated because it was taxation without representation. So any of these things that you see right here, Americans have different ideals about what should be happening with American government, especially coming out of the Enlightenment that is coming out of Europe. So when you take a look at down this list, if you are still struggling with contextualizations, you've got now one contextualization here, a second right here. There is migration to the colonies and within the colonies. And that is something that is then going to bring us to the 7 Years' War, which is the beginning point of what any essay question could be asked about on your AP test. Abby, will you still get a test dropped? You will. And that is also part of the grading process, since we have now passed the Q3 spot, but they haven't asked us for any Q3 recording or any of that stuff formally. So yeah, once we get the word of that, then that's going to be something that'll be done for your grade 2. So let's look back at the 7 Years' War first of all. And with the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, notice your essay question right here. So any of the things that you see coming up are going to very much give you a chance to practice your AP essay questions. Explain the causes and effects of the 7 Years' War. And what I really want to highlight for you today then is I want to remind you of how you can be using this in your spare time. If it's asking you to explain the causes are provided right over here. If it's asking you for the effects, by defeating the French, the British were able to expand. It cost them a lot of money. They're in debt. They tried to raise revenue, and they tried to maintain control over the colonists. But you had this rivalry going on between the British and the French. Ever since the early 1700s, there was a series of wars that eventually culminated into this spot. After the victory, there was an attempt to prevent colonists from moving westward. And you'll notice again, they're giving you every element of what you'd need on the AP test, but over in the margin, you should have written down that this attempt to stop people from moving is known as the Proclamation Line of 1763. And that's going to stop the colonists from moving out west, with the argument that Native Americans are being protected by the British. And many of the Americans are questioning, why are we protecting the Native Americans? And why are we protecting that area of the Ohio River Valley from being expanded into, when if the colonists move in, they could then wipe out Indians as a threat and then move further and further inland to get more resources for the British. This leads us to the idea of taxation without representation. You've got your theme right here. So they could be asking you to explore the idea of America's relationship in the world. So they could ask you with this question and this topic, things that extend beyond this moment. How did this, and perhaps what was going on during the Washington and Adams presidencies with like Jay's Treaty and the XYZ affair, how are they all interrelated? Because they all run the same thread or theme throughout. But explain how British colonial policies regarding North America led to the Revolutionary War. That is your DBQ question that you've got going on right here, right? So when the British are going to do things here in America, they're going to stir Americans to want to become more independent. As we take a look then, British are going to try to collect taxes without colonial representation or consent, and try to assert imperial control. Over on the right-hand side here, this is where then you should be able to jot down specific taxes or things that the king was doing to the colonists that were trying to impose control on them. And if you think back, you guys have a study chart that you guys created that was saved and submitted electronically. So take a moment and see on the right-hand side which of those you held on to. So in just a second, I will run through a list of the ones I would use, see which ones you've retained of the taxes or actions that the king did, and see if you can do it in chronological order. So let me run you through a list of the ones that I taught you about in class. And so we learned about the Sugar Act, which was trying to put a tax on molasses that was used as a sweetener. It was also turned into rum. It was part of the triangular trade. And when the colonists boycotted, that tax went away. The big one, though, was the Stamp Act that was created, putting a tax on paper, infuriating lawyers and newspaper publishers. They start boycotting. The Sons of Liberty are created. The tax gets taken away, but it's also taken away with the Declaratory Act at the same time, announcing that the colonists had to obey every law that was created by the British. We then talked about like Grenville and the Grenville Acts, the Townsend Acts that were creating taxes on a whole host of different things. And we also learned about protests. And it talks down here about colonial leaders based their calls for resistance on British arguments about the rights of British subjects. That's John Locke that you read about. The rights of the individual, local traditions of self-rule, and the ideas of the Enlightenment, that we are all created equal, that we're all endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Life, liberty, and property becomes life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what we'll find here is this leads to more and more aggressive protests, like the Boston Massacre in 1770. And remember, that's not the start of the revolution. It's 5 years too early. But you have these taxes like the Tea Act that comes out of the Grenville taxes and the Townsend duties, where we just have a tax on tea. And it's sneaky because it actually is going to sell British tea at a cheaper price, but with a tax attached to it, making it cheaper than Dutch tea. But it also means that you're consenting to taxes, and that leads to the Boston Tea Party. We have the Intolerable Acts, also known as the Coercive Acts, that is eventually going to lead to the incidents at Lexington and Concord. And it is during this time period that you've got colonial leaders like Ben Franklin, popular movements like the Sons of Liberty. You have the Committees of Correspondence. You have Thomas Paine, who is working during this time period to try to educate people with common sense. And we have shortages that are taking place, and men and women are working in large numbers to try to support the movement towards patriotism. Remember, and this should go over on the margin over here, the idea of Republican motherhood, the idea that women see themselves as being virtuous women who are not just there to take care of their families and to prop up their religions, but also to protect democracy and independence and republic. And that's going to lead them into becoming supporters of the war effort too. You'll see here philosophical foundations of the American Revolution, and it's asking you here, evaluate the extent of change of ideas about American independence. This is where you'll find a huge element of that. This is shaping our national identity. Explain how and why colonial attitudes about government and the individual changed in the years leading up to the American Revolution. You will notice that that is almost identical to what the DBQ question is. This is not accidental. So this is where we really want to be living when it comes to your review, is if you take these concept outlines seriously, they do provide for you all of the answers that you would need. It does require some work because you do need to provide proper nouns. Like when they do mention Enlightenment ideas and philosophies, that is John Locke, that is Thomas Paine, that is Benjamin Franklin, that is this discussion that we as Americans emphasize individual talent over what family you're from. We do have religion here inside the United States, which gives people the idea that they are blessed with liberty, coming from that city on a hill perspective. And you remember that the city on the hill was Boston. So the idea that Boston is so revolutionary is coming very much from the idea that they believe they're God's chosen people. The colonists believe that their ideas are better than everybody else's. And this is where Thomas Paine is coming from, where Thomas Paine writes about this question: how is it that a little island across the ocean is able to dominate a massive continent like ours from afar? Why is it that America doesn't run itself, especially since they have been for the past century and a half during salutary neglect? Remember the Declaration of Independence. And what I'd like you to think about is with this question right here, there are turning points that take place. It says, evaluate the extent of change in ideas about American independence from 1763 to 1783. The most common riff that kids will go on is, oh, Americans wanted independence and freedom, and they hated the British and they wanted to break away. And that is a middle school essay that would get a really bad score. It wouldn't be a failure, but it isn't one that tells us you should be bypassed from doing college U.S. history because of the great depth of your knowledge. What many college professors recognize is if you take a look at this moment right here, this was described as our turning point in this time period. So you may want to accentuate that. You may want to mention that the ideas of American independence weren't the same throughout the time period. And in particular, what we emphasize for you guys is from 1763 until the 1776, many Americans were fighting for salutary neglect. Can we go back to the old ways of doing things? When shooting actually broke out, the Continental Congress sent an olive branch petition saying, whoa, can we just calm down, relax, figure out ways to unite? Ben Franklin had created the Albany Congress, and it was with the Declaration of Independence that Jefferson announces, you know what, we are fighting for something new. He creates a huge laundry list from the committees of correspondence saying, here's all the things that the king has done bad. We're now developing our own country with our own ideas that we do believe that the government is existing only to protect people's rights. You have the right to life, liberty, not just property, but the pursuit of happiness. And then you don't get these rights from government, you get those rights from God. And that means that they are internal and that they cannot be taken away from you, which means that our ideas about what American independence means shifts from 1776 onwards, to the point where when the French actually joined the American Revolution, the British came to him and said, look, how about we just quit this? We'll give you what you want. You can have salutary neglect back. And when they were offered that midway through the American Revolution following Saratoga, the Americans said no to the king. They said, we're done. We're becoming something more. We want something more, and we're becoming independent. So explain how various factors contributed to the American victory in the American Revolution. If you think back to what we taught you in class, we had many loyalists inside the country, and also England had military and financial advantages. Remember these elements. We had the colonial militias and the Continental Army that helped to win the war. And they were using the idea that we're going to study in the Vietnam War with the idea that all they have to do is resist and get a tie. The American continent is large. And so the idea that George Washington has is to just keep the military alive and make sure that they don't get defeated in a horrible battle by the British. And that will then wear down the British financially, emotionally, especially since you've got the radical Whigs in Europe who don't want to be part of this war. You do have this ideological commitment going on that is supporting the Americans, but don't get too carried away by this. All of these things are highlighting great American elements. You may want to put over in the margin over here that we do have a Continental Congress, eventually the Articles of Confederation. All of these states that have resources hold them back instead of giving them to the military that's fighting the battle at the time. And as a result, you have like Valley Forge, where George Washington is stuck with no shoes, with inadequate clothing, without enough food. But by holding the military together, he is able to keep the resistance going. The battle that belongs over here on the side is Saratoga, and that's going to be the big one that you need to be aware of. The other battles aren't going to be all that consequential in an essay. That one is because it's the thing that drags the French into the war. You do want to keep in mind, though, the two different phases of the war. At the beginning of the war, the British start in the north. They capture every major city of the United States, and they discover that most Americans are farmers, and so they don't really care that all of their cities have been captured. When that fails, the British then move into the South with the hope that they can split the South away from the North. But the dilemma that they have is in the South, when they make a plea to African Americans to join with the British military to overthrow the plantation owners in the South, many white plantation owners start fighting very vigorously to defend against the British. And eventually, Cornwallis is going to be captured at Yorktown. When we think about the influence of revolutionary ideas, explain the various ways the American Revolution affected society. You're right back to this idea again. The idea of what does it mean to be an American during and following the American Revolution. So during and after the American Revolution, there is an understanding that there were inequalities in our society. So when you take a look at this, many kids will steer themselves towards the idea of like a triumphant march forwards of just gaining independence and freedom. We learned largely that that's going to be reserved for white men. Abigail Adams is going to be asking for John Adams to remember the ladies during this time period, and they don't. So women are going to find themselves running a thread, and this is your theme that you see right here. Some Americans are about to gain independence, but then in 1848, you learn about Seneca Falls. You then learned in the late 1800s about the suffragette movement that during the time period of Woodrow Wilson led us towards the 19th Amendment. There are some people calling for the end of slavery, and the term that I gave you that you can write over here is some Americans are going to engage in manumission, where they're voluntarily going to give up their slaves. But in the 1790s, when they invent the cotton gin, that's done. And we're going to see that we're creating governmental structures that are not going to be giving equal rights to African Americans. Instead, they're going to be caught up in the Barbados slave codes that become the black codes that are going to very much maintain a segregated version of what America is. This idea of Republican motherhood is going to carry on in the future with the idea that women's role should be to be the ones providing at home. But oftentimes women and men have these blurry lines between them because of the fact that they are working on the same farms with one another. And so it's not like they have different spheres. They will eventually in the 1800s, and that becomes known as the cult of domesticity. Women during this time period, though, are educating their kids. They're teaching their kids about democracy and liberty, Republican values, and leading us towards the idea of what does it mean to be a good American. It says here, describe the global impact of the American Revolution. So I want to remind you of these things. Number one, with the American Revolution, we will have a revolution in France. The French Revolution turns into a bloodbath during the time period of Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. And that bloodbath leads to the invention of the guillotine to kill thousands. And it leads to a backlash from European countries who crushed democracy in France. It leads to the rise of an emperor in Napoleon. And we're going to find that there's a lot of concern that happens in Europe about this democratic seed that America planted. Remember Haiti during the Jefferson presidency, we had a man named Toussaint Louverture who was able to overwhelm the planters on Haiti. He was then able to defeat the French when they came to attack the island. And it was that defeat that convinced the French that if they can't conquer Haiti, they can't conquer America. And it leads to the Louisiana Purchase. And then in the mid-1800s, you have this Latin American independence movement. But then that Latin American independence gets thwarted a lot by the United States, whether it's the taking of Texas during the Jackson presidency or the taking of chunks of Mexico during the Polk presidency, or imperialism that you see in the late 18 and early 1900s. Many of these Latin American independence movements are going to find American opposition when America is going to want to use the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary to figure out ways to have an advantage in our interactions with them. Now, as you take a look at the Articles of Confederation, this is the final element that could potentially be used inside of your essay because the Articles are created as a wartime government. So let me remind you about how the Articles work, explain how different forms of government developed and changed as a result of the Revolutionary period. You had each state governing themselves. These states were kind of seen as laboratories of democracies. They were creating written constitutions. They were figuring out ways to expand voting. They had legislative branches that were meant to help out with the governing process. Many of them are creating this multi-branch structure of governments where they have a governor and the state legislature. And these laboratories are going to help to govern the country while we're under the Articles of Confederation. The Articles were a one-branch government that you guys learned about during the American Revolution. It's a wartime government, and this government only has the power to make recommendations. They're not allowed to tax, they're not allowed to police, they're not allowed to enforce laws. So remember, this is going to be the thing that allows the states to have freedom to do what they want to do, but they also can coordinate with one another on big issues, but then the states have the opportunity to determine whether or not they want to adhere to any decisions that are made. That is what you're witnessing right now, where for President Trump, his reaction to coronavirus has been very much less federal and much more Confederate. So we're watching as he is saying he doesn't feel like he's got the constitutional ability to tell states to do what we've done in Minnesota. He feels like that would be unconstitutional. That is a strict interpretation of the Constitution, though. You have seen at times Abraham Lincoln, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt go that far, especially if we are in a time of war, to try to deal with a pending threat. But right now, we do have states where, like yesterday, we had churches in the South that were fully enforced. We've got beaches in Georgia that are reopening, even though they didn't know that this could spread the disease. That's very much coming from this foundation way back when. So the Articles of Confederation, during the Civil War, the South will call themselves the Confederacy. During your civil rights unit that you guys just wrapped up, you notice that the states kept talking about the idea of states' rights when they were trying to resist any sorts of attempts to make change. And the Confederate form of government means the states have power, the central government has very little. You'll remember, though, that the only thing that the Articles were able to get done well is they passed the Northwest Ordinance that allowed people to start moving into the Ohio area. But in that area, they did something weird. They created a grid system for settlement, which was something that created an orderly way to expand out west. They actually mandated public education, but then they also announced that slavery was not permitted in that area. So for this very weak government, they still step out on that limb and say that they're banning slavery because it's not right for that area. But they're also not super thrilled about its idea as being part of what the Americans fought for during the American Revolution. We are then going to be moving next into the Constitutional Convention, but we're saving that instead for what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. So this is all that you need for your DBQ. And so with the DBQ that I want you to write tonight, I want you to give yourself a test drive for writing the full DBQ process when you're doing your work today. You've got on your ongoing sheet then this set of instructions. And so have this handy when you're working and have your rubric available too. When you type this essay on AP Classroom, and again, you'll find it as the Period 3 Review DBQ, I'm going to want you to type this up and I want you to put a thesis statement in your first paragraph. I want you to label what you think your thesis statement is so I can see where you're sitting currently a month out from the AP test. I'm going to want you to then use a contextualization and make it its own paragraph following the thesis statement paragraph. If you're feeling like you are really up to speed and you want your essay to flow better, you can put this in the same paragraph as this. You're just risking having the two blur together, and that could then be called double dipping, and it would prevent you from earning one or the other point, and most likely you'd lose your contextualization point. Remember what we talked about, though, during the session that we've been doing today. They've provided for you in your yellow concept outline a section in and of itself that could be seen as contextualization. If you don't know what you're doing, look at that page and think about which of those seems to be the big trend or movement that has the most relationship back to this essay question to explain how it's the bigger trend or movement that this is part of, and you should be in a really good place. In your body paragraphs, I'm going to want you to answer the full question, and I want you to use 5 of the documents, make one of them your teapot. For each of the documents, I'm going to want you to not just summarize the document's main point, but I actually want you to take time to explain how does that document help you to answer this question better. So it's great if you can say, oh, this teapot says no Stamp Act, and that means that colonists hate the Stamp Act. You have summarized the document with no new information. You've done nothing impressive, but you've probably earned, or you're pretty close to it, the point of summarizing what the document is. I want you to explain how this image made between, showing a teapot made between these two time periods, how could it show you the extent that we are changing our ideas about what it means for American independence? That's when you'll be in a good place. I want you with each document to use an element of happy, and happy is either historical context, audience, point of view, or purpose, but also why does that help us to understand this document better in answering this question. If you find that with happy or hippo, you don't know what those terms mean, take a look in this area for analysis and reasoning, historical situation, audience, point of view, purpose, or just take a look at the top right here. When it says sourcing the documents, they give you happy right in this area here, okay? I'm going to want you to use two outside pieces of information then, things that are not in the documents that are provided for you that could also be used to support your essay. And this could be things like documents that were written during this time period to expand the ideas of independence, or taxes that they have not described. But then at the end of your essay, I want you to give me your thesis statement again, label it your thesis, and provide another contextualization at the end of your essay, explaining what larger trends or movements are coming. And if you take a look at your concept outline, we're about to move into the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Our debate about what American independence means isn't done yet. It's going to continue in the future. You may also find that where you were writing about, perhaps you don't want to go there, but we end up this unit, this DBQ, talking about the idea of confederation. You know that that's going to come back as an idea of either nullification, when you take a look at Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, John C. Calhoun with South Carolina, the South when it comes to the Civil War, nullification efforts for civil rights when you take a look at like Little Rock, Arkansas. You've got a lot of places you could go with your contextualization in the future. You may also find midway through your essay that you're tempted to contextualize again, where you're going to be tempted to go, oh, and if you look at this element right here, this could be seen as connecting to this other bigger trend or movement. You will find that eventually you're going to start noticing a lot of bigger trends or movements that you could be linking to are going to start popping out for you. I wanted to do this with a 45-minute time limit with no excuses. So I don't want you to get done, write like 3 sentences, and then have some sort of lame excuse afterwards. Take whatever review time you need to take a look at your concept outline, take a look at your notes, do your planning, but then take 45 minutes to write this thing. And then I want you to submit it on AP Classroom. My plan then for you tomorrow is I plan on giving you a survey tomorrow to find out where you're sitting at this point with your writing. How are you doing with these skills? Are you feeling okay with thesis, contextualization? I'm going to be asking you what you want me to emphasize, because really the ball is in your court at this point. And what is tragic about you being gone from school is I don't get to interact with you. But what's nice about being away from school is you've got time on your own. If you are somebody who's good with time management and you're doing what you're supposed to, you can actually do some self-reflection, figure out where you are. I can then address it independently, and not having to focus so deeply on periods 8 and 9 gives me a lot more free time to be able to help you out. If also you discover that while you're working today, you get confused about anything and you're like, gosh, I don't understand what's going on with this. I'm not sure if I'm on the right track. You can feel free to email me, or else I can totally set up with a Google Meet like this to talk you through. So this is going to give me the opportunity to do way more coaching with you guys if that's something that you would like from me. For you guys then, I wouldn't worry about any other content or textbook reading or whatever today. Let's just focus on your essay writing. Now that we know what you're expected to do, it would be really great to get you confident with what the College Board is looking for to make sure that you're in a good place. And then if we can couple that with how our reviews work and with our new content, and we can get you to the point where when we're studying new stuff, instead of it being like blah, 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 fact, instead you're thinking, I would use this in this way. I would use this in this sort of perspective. I'll be able to share with you soon essay questions that have been used by the College Board in the past, and putting that together with your concept outlines, we should be able to put you into a really good place. So I'm checking my chat right now. I don't see any new questions yet, and you've got some work that I've put on you. So I am going to wrap up really quickly. So if you do have any other questions, please make sure you type them in the chat right now, or else feel free to unmic if you'd like to talk to me about anything. Otherwise, good luck with your writing today. Keep in mind that we're in our formative phase. So if you're totally stressed out and you're like, my God, I am so not ready for all of this stuff to come together, this is kind of like what we've done with every other writing piece. I just taught you a bunch of new stuff that you're going to be doing. Now is the time to try it out once and see what problems are out there, and then we can keep you safe. If you've got nothing else and I'm not seeing any other questions popping up, you guys have a great day. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you tomorrow. Sophia, I see your question as far as what's the difference between the cult of domesticity and the Republican motherhood movement. So the way to think about Republican motherhood is happening during the period of the late 1700s, and it's the idea that women during the time period who see themselves as good patriots, they're going to be trying to do what they can to support the patriot movement. During the period of 1763 to 1775, they're the ones who are leading boycotts on British goods as daughters of liberty. And they're also the ones who are trying to make the materials that their family needs. So if they can't buy clothing from England, they're going to instead start making their own clothing at home. And they're going to be doing so because it's patriotic. They're going to teach their kids basic school skills. They're going to teach them religion, but then they're also going to teach them good patriotic values to try to help them become the next democratic Republican leaders that our country will need coming up in the next generation. And the thing that prevents it from being the cult of domesticity, which if you think about a domestic means home or homemaker. It's during this time period that most Americans are farmers. 90+% of Americans are farmers in the 1700s. So in Republican motherhood, it's not like women had this place where they worked and men worked in this place. Women might make the meals. Men might have like certain chores that they're doing, but when it's time to work, men, women, and children all go in the field together. The cult of domesticity is during our transportation, market, and industrial revolutions, where in the cities, men would go to their business job or their factory job. Women would stay home at the house, being the homemaker and the mother. And they'd be able to finish those jobs rather quickly. And that's where you saw them also getting involved in reform movements, where they've been given a job and a sphere of influence that for most women, they don't need an entire day to do all the cleaning of the house. And that's where you start ending up with like Seneca Falls, the temperance movement, the abolitionist movement, because these women are looking for purpose outside of this narrow definition they've gotten. Sophia, you good? I am too. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to let me know. I miss you guys. Hope you guys are doing good. I will see you tomorrow then. Thanks, guys.